Welcome to NOCLIP Pocket. Type better, email faster, work smarter. I'm Chad Ruthermond.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And today, we're going to be talking about Nanotale Typing Chronicles, which was a game that was developed and published by Fishing Cactus, was also published by Plug-in Digital and 2P Games, and was released on October 23rd, 2020 on the PC. And the reason that it was released exclusively on the PC, though I guess there's an argument to be made that some consoles are capable of this now, it's definitely less than convenient most of the time, is that this is a typing game, and is the follow-up to a game that we did several years ago now, called Epistory, also subtitled Typing Chronicles.
Yep. And so this game actually doesn't have a Wikipedia page, so I think it's also on Mac because Epistory was.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's a very obvious follow-up to Epistory. There's a lot of the same things in here. You play as a girl who rides around on a fox, who casts magical spells by typing the names of them in.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make the comparison to a recent episode we did on Telling Lies.
Right.
Because Telling Lies was a spiritual follow-up to a game called Her Story.
Mm-hmm.
And while I still think Telling Lies is a good game, it does kind of feel like it's Her Story again, but with a different story. It's being overly simplistic, but this game I think very easily could have felt the same way, but I think it does enough different stuff or iterates on the concept enough that it feels like significantly different. It feels like an improvement or like an iteration on the idea and not just like the same thing again.
Sure. I this is very interesting to me, and it's going to be probably a fairly interesting podcast because of it. Because my thoughts when you brought up the comparison were, I am glad that we chose to do this as a pocket episode. We did the original, even though it is similarly short, as a full episode. One, because Pocket didn't exist at the time, and two, because the game is interesting enough in how different it is from other games, even in its overarching sort of like RPG genre, that it was something that we could get into. We could talk about like how it implements its RPG elements and how the typing is done and all that stuff. Whereas I feel like this game is so similar that I find it the opposite to Telling Lies, which I felt was a game that felt like it had different goals and did different things in order to service those, whereas this game feels like it has the same goals and it just attempted to iterate. And in my opinion, I don't think it did it particularly well.
See, I would agree. I feel like Telling Lies had different goals, but in the execution was like the same, and this is kind of the opposite, where it has the same goals in a different execution.
I can kind of see that, yeah.
That's kind of getting muddy there, but yeah, I just feel like a lot of like the criticisms and things we had of Epistory, this game addresses. Like, I went back and listened to the episode because I hadn't since we put it out, I don't think. Once I started playing Nanotale, and I was like, it almost feels like the developers listened to our episode.
And it's not impossible that they did,
Yeah.
They're a pretty small developer.
But because one of the big things that stood out to me right off the bat, it was like, this is the perfect solution to this thing that we harped on about, is how they handled the movement this time.
Right.
They had this weird setup, and I don't even remember what the keys were because they were like scattered all across, so that you could keep your hands on the home keys.
Right.
And move. And I tried to do that because I was like, I don't like the idea of like having to move my hand to start typing because I feel like I'll get clumsy fingers if I do that.
Yeah.
So I tried to use their wonky controls, and then if there was ever any kind of like a slidey ice puzzle, I would just use the arrow keys. But this time, it seems like such an obvious solution once they implement it, is that they just made it, instead of WASD, they made it ESDF.
Right.
So you can just keep your fingers where they would be to type, but it feels the same as was. And I was like, perfect.
Yep, there it is. And like it took only a little bit of time to get used to. Like for a while I would like habitually
I
jump
did that
back.
a few times.
Yeah.
But
But once you get used to it, it does feel very natural. And actually moving around in this game, barring a few kind of unusual examples, worked pretty well. I think that, like the movement was overall improved.
yeah. To the point where I felt like it wasn't an issue this time around. So I thought that was cool to see as an improvement. And another thing I really like that they did is they added modifiers for your spells.
Mm-hmm.
So you type in like spark or ice, water, etc., whatever all they are to use those spells. But then you also have modifiers like ray, and then you can modify that even further by saying like you want to shoot a long one. So you type like ray, long, ice, and then you type the word. I thought that was really engaging, and I liked how that stuff could like affect the environment as well.
Yeah. That kind of is, I mean, I don't know. We're just kind of going to do our own thing, I think, on this episode. I am incredibly torn on the way that puzzles were handled in this game, because by and large, like if you just looked at every instance of puzzle individually, there are more puzzles in this game than there were in Epistory by a country mile.
Oh yeah.
And that is cool. Because I like that, because otherwise your primary and almost only engagement mechanically with the game is just type fast. And and like I like type fast, but me also like do puzzle. So like in a way that's a welcome relief. Like I liked being able to spend some time doing things that were not just wave-based combat.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference between the two. Is Epistory feels closer to like the kind of educational games
To Typer Shark.
Yeah, to exactly. That's my touchstone.
Yeah.
The classic PopCap game, Typer Shark. It's wave-based typing. As enemies you're just in the middle of the screen. Enemies come at you. You type them before they get to you to kill them. And this feels like it's trying to lean a lot further towards the side of just being like a top-down Zelda-ish style game that you control with typing, because like you move around the overworld and there's just enemies there, and you can just pop the book open at any time and type at them.
Yep.
And it tries to integrate puzzles into the world like a Zelda style thing. And I think that's probably, at least this would be my guess, because I like this game quite a bit, but I've seen a lot of people who I think, I get the impression like you have like mixed feelings on it. Is I don't think it does it super gracefully all the time. But even with a little bit of like a botched implementation in places, for me it worked. Like it was totally worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I don't necessarily want to say that I'm mixed. I think at the end of the day, I'm still positive on this game. I think that most of the things that they did to improve what was already in Epistory were real improvements. I think that I enjoyed a lot of them. The reason I bring up the puzzles in sort of a wavering light is because one, I think that there being a lot of puzzles is a good thing. And I think that their implementation of like entering typing mode is a great idea and makes both the overworld traversal and combat more engaging, because you can move around and do shit in between.
Right.
My problem is that I felt like the puzzles themselves were not as varied as the ones that were in Epistory. And I realize it's asking a lot of a developer to make more puzzles of the same level of intricacy that they were in the game where there were less of them. So it does make me feel like, okay, maybe I'm overstepping bounds here. But the number of times that I solved a puzzle by just being like, large, pull this, was higher than I would want, I would say. You just sort of type the same kind of stuff.
Yeah. I might just be misremembering, but I feel like I feel kind of the opposite.
I mean, I could also be misremembering.
Yeah, because I feel like I barely remember there even being puzzles in Epistory. Like, I remember there were, like, ice move around on ice kind of puzzles.
Yeah, you had the move around on ice puzzles.
But that's all that I really remember.
The power plant had the mazes where you had to light up the different things in order to move the stuff. The floating isles had the wind puzzles where you had to activate the windmills and stuff.
Right.
And that was basically, like, it was more like a Zelda dungeon setup in that game where you would get a new power and they would introduce something that was related to that power. That was your puzzle. And this game does a similar thing and then does a better job of actually letting you use all of your different abilities in order to solve puzzles in different ways. And I love that. I just think that there were a lot of puzzles that were just like, use a spell here to raise the ground, use a spell here to move something out of the way. It's like, if there was a little bit more intricacy to the puzzles, I would have been happier.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not a criticism so much as like a wish list item for typing Chronicles 3, but like that's something that I kept feeling like, especially in the laced we're a long A on that one, in the last area of the game, in the desert area, I felt like a lot of the puzzles ended up being kind of copy paste, and that's when I got tired of it, which was far enough in the game that I guess it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, I might just, like I said, just not remember the puzzles in Epistory well enough, but I just feel like in this there were puzzles where I actually had to like stop and think about how to like use like which things to combine. Like, it felt like you had enough elements that you always actually had to stop and puzzle something out. And in a way that I liked. It actually did kind of... Because I feel like the comparisons to Zelda with Epistory, I felt were, like, a lot more just, like, the style of game. Yeah. Like, that it's a top-down style thing. And in this, I felt like the puzzles actually got to, like, scratching a Zelda kind of itch for me.
I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of pushing sheep, I guess. That may have been that was the death knell for me. Oh, I gotta push his damn sheep again. Did you have an example of anything else that we had talked about before that you think that they did better this time around?
Well, not as specific as those ones we already brought up, but there were things like we talked about the papercraft art style of the original game, and we kind of talked about how we liked it a lot. It's like a cool visual style, but it felt like it was kind of confusing because they didn't really use that thematically at all, and they were like, enemies were like bugs, and we're like, how does that relate to paper? And it just kind of seemed like a cool visual style that they just kind of picked because they thought it was cool.
I mean, they were right. It was cool.
And it was. Yeah. I think it was smarter in this to go for a more just like of a more normal kind of art style and less of a specific thing. So you don't end up feeling that way. Like there's what's the point of the papercraft?
Right.
So I thought that was smart. And I feel like I had something else, but now I'm kind of blanking on it. The story.
Oh, yeah.
I think this game, I think is a little bit weaker than an Epistory, because I think in this style of game, it's better to have a vaguer story and to kind of just, the fun of it, just be playing through it, and there's kind of like some backstory and like a shoestring kind of narrative to pull you through it, which is basically what Epistory had. And this tries to do a bit more with its story, but I don't think it does it particularly well. Like, it's one of those, some games, you mash A through the dialogue with NPCs. In some games, you read it. And this falls on the mash through the dialogue side for me, where I just kind of didn't care.
Yeah. I think that there is a divide between, like, what they imagined were the important parts of the narrative and which were the NPC parts of the narrative, because the major events in the story I thought were all well written enough.
I don't mean to imply that it was bad.
Right, yeah. I'm just saying that, like, I read those, and I read sort of like the dialogue between the main characters. But the NPC dialogue is pretty asinine. Like, a lot of them are very sort of like cut and dry, simple characters with like one note personalities, and I realize that it's an NPC in a game and you don't expect them to all to be vibrant, but I feel like they want you to talk to a lot of them, and every time that I talked to one of them I felt like I didn't really get anything out of it.
Yeah, it was nice that you had to type to start talking to them, and you had to like ask them questions. So I thought that was cool. I think they could have integrated the typing even more into the dialogue to maybe make it a bit more engaging.
Yeah, it seems like a first step on the way to something that could be very cool.
Yeah.
Given more, I don't know, time, or like even if maybe this just wasn't a priority for them.
Yeah.
But if they were able to make like dialogue trees in the way of like, you know, like a Telltale game or a Life is Strange
you have
kind of thing.
multiple options to type.
Yeah, you just type out your responses.
Yeah, I think it was a good idea to add in more like video gamey, like RPG elements, like having towns with people. I just think maybe a fewer number with like, you know, that are more fleshed out or a little bit less generic feeling would probably be the way to go.
I do want to shout out, because what I thought of as I was talking about this is the idea of like having to type out a whole response to a question that's like multiple sentences long. The level up screen when you get a new ability, like there's a lot of abilities that are like sprint, and you just sprint, done, finished it. But then there's one that's like more damage to basic rat enemy, and it makes you type the whole thing.
Yeah, that's one thing that stood out to me is whenever they give you really long string, like a whole sentence like that, it was really hard not to hit the space bar.
Yep, which turns off the book mode.
Well, that doesn't matter in the level up screen.
Right.
But I just, like, that always would trip me up, because I'm like, I do it, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I don't need to. And then I, you know, like I keep typing, and I'm like, I fuck up, and I have to start over. So, yeah, I think that you run into that hurdle when you want them to, if you wanted the player to type more, you either have to make them hit the space bar or something.
And I want to call out, because I don't think it's bad to make the player type a whole bunch of stuff. The perennial typing game that everyone who talks about a typing game will have to come back to at one point or another, Typing of the Dead, has an incredibly memorable boss whose whole shtick is that they slowly approach you, but you have to type these huge long, like every enemy in the game is just like one word,
you have
two
to type
words.
Like a paragraph.
You have to type like a big paragraph for every point of damage that you deal to him. And it's really memorable, and it's like a big shake up from what you would normally do. And this game doesn't really do that mechanically. It does have a few times where you have to type a lot, but it would be interesting to see that implemented. But even if they didn't want to, I just want to differentiate that, like, it's weird that they make you type a whole sentence in this one instance, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, you know?
Yeah, because you open the book with spacebar, so I think if you changed that, and then maybe you could implement something like that, like in Typing of the Dead, where it's in a boss fight, where you had to type out a paragraph, and then if people out of habit type the space, it doesn't close the book,
right?
And you can actually do it that way.
I actually want to talk about, this game has boss fights. Epistory, I assume it did, but none of them are coming to mind.
It didn't.
It was just waves.
Well, yeah, you could say that the final wave in each nest was like the boss wave,
right?
But it didn't have like a boss that you fought. It was just waves of enemies.
Okay, that is good, because it means that my brain hasn't entirely corroded over the last 3 years.
But yeah, this has actual like boss fights that are different from the waves of enemies.
Yeah, and I actually liked them by and large.
Yeah, me too. It's something, it felt like a logical like next step to actually try and implement some bosses. And yeah, I like that the last one does just summon waves of enemies at you. Like, I thought that was like a cool subversion. because the first two work in a certain way where you kind of have to like use the environmental effects against them, which is cool. And then I like that it switched it up for the last one.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does, it kind of like calls back to the first game where that was like the primary thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the wave-based combat's actually pretty rare in this game.
Yeah.
It's not something that comes up a lot. And I'm going to sound like such a wishy-washy piece of shit, because I do love the boss fights, and I like that there's a lot of overworld sort of like individual enemies and little puzzles to do that you're typing for. But they also took the arena mode out of this game, which means
I didn't even check.
Yeah, there's like no way to just like boot the game and then just type a lot, which it sounds like a weird thing to want, but like when you're playing this kind of a game, like sometimes like you just feel hot, you know? You're like, I'm on it today. I just want like a real challenge or a test, and unless you're at that point in the narrative, it isn't going to give it to you.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Because like the original does feel like a little bit more like arcadey, if you will, in that way, where like it's more about like carrying your combo through the overworld, and like like you said, it has the arena mode, so you can just type a bunch. And this one's way more just like it's adventure in a top-down adventure game.
Yeah,
you know, it's a lot less focused on the because like the with Epistory, I brought this up when we talked about it, is that it's not an educational game, but it does feel like it wants to like help you improve your typing speed, and it tracked your words per minute.
Yeah,
this game doesn't.
Right.
So yeah,
it doesn't even have combos.
Yeah, it shows you like that difference in goals, like we said at the beginning. It shifted a little bit more to just wanting to be a game, and less like it wants to be a typing game. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. And if they chose to do the things that they did out of the idea of like, we want to make a quote unquote real game using typing as just your interface, then this game does a lot to differentiate it a lot more than Epistory did. So, you know, like if that's the design goal, I can't exactly fault them for it. Like even if it's just not, maybe it isn't what I was looking for specifically. Yeah. It is still like it does a good job of it.
Yeah, and I do agree. I feel like there should have been more of the wave-based typing, because like you encounter it early on, but then it's just like a super long time till you get to the next one, and it just felt kind of weird.
Yeah,
because like I like that sort of thing, but I felt like it got a little old in Epistory because it's like all that you really do. But in this, I'm like kind of itching for it. At a certain point, I'm like, okay, like. Because, yeah, you can go a long time without really typing very much.
Right. Well, it's like if they made a Tetris RPG and that you only actually drop blocks and make lines in, like, 3 fights. Yeah. And then the rest of it was, like, a weird other thing. Yeah,
so, yeah, I agree that, like, the balance is kind of off there.
But, yeah. I guess on that note, because this does relate to the wave-based stuff as well, but how did you feel about, one, just combat generally, and also the implementation of the use of magic in combat? Because I am of 2 minds, both of them kind of positive, though.
I liked it. I think I really liked the direction they went, and I think they did implement it pretty well. Like, being able to move around, and I think they handled like the speed of enemies well, and I like that there were like enemies with like water on their back, or like a little explosive fire thingy on their back that you can use to either, you know, like spill some acid from somewhere, then blow it up and take out a bunch of enemies. I like what they're doing with that. It does feel like they could have maybe done a bit more, but like for what it is, I think I liked it quite a bit. And I liked it, like, especially in boss fights. I don't remember if they had this in any regular fights, but ones where you had to like move the floor to like get up to a certain spot and then do something, like, you know, when you had to like use the environment and the type, when you're using like all the shit you can do, which ends up being a lot by the end of the game, is probably when it was at its best, I think.
Yeah, I did kind of the end of the game ended up being I sort of Majora's Masked it a bit, because if you level up to the max, the last thing that you get is something called Self. It's the 4th spell shape, and it allows you to cast spells just on you,
Right.
which absolutely breaks any puzzle that you could be doing, because you can just cast any spell on yourself and immediately activate the effect.
I totally got that, but then proceeded to never use it.
Smart move, because I was
Just but completely accidentally. I was like, Self, what does that do? And then proceeded to just
I won't find out.
It just immediately left my brain, and I just never used it.
Yeah, I got it at a bad time, because I think I had it and then almost immediately went to the final boss. And the final boss area is get into his inner sanctum, and there's a bunch of those little pillars that they want you to use Zap on, and I just used Zap on me because I just had just gotten it, and so I just basically typed 3 words and then walked into the final boss fight. So, and I wasn't even really thinking about it. I was just like, this is an ability I have now. Let's try it. And it worked real well. And I just did it and went through. And it wasn't until after I was like, I probably totally bypassed the most intricate puzzle in the game.
It wasn't that hard.
Oh, okay. All right. That's good.
You actually didn't really rob yourself of much.
Okay.
So it's actually fortunate you didn't get it till right before the end.
Yeah. Right. What I was going to talk about that just sort of spun off of was the combat and the use of magic in it. And the reason that I'm of two minds on it is that I felt like I didn't use magic in combat very often, but I remembered in Epistory always using Gust all the time without ever not using it, because it just felt way too good. You just pushed everything away, and it just
I thought Spark was the one.
Oh, Spark may have been the one that I used all the time. There were several that were over centralizing.
I think we talked about Gust being good, but a lot of the arenas weren't designed for it, because it would push the enemies to where you couldn't see the words.
Right. Okay. So maybe it was Spark that was too good.
Because it chained damage.
That's what it was. So some of the stuff in the first game felt over-centralizing, and all you would do is just this one thing over and over again. So the fact that I didn't use magic is almost a good thing, because it means that there wasn't anything that was just super overpowered.
See, for me, I did that in this game, where everything was large, fire. I felt like fire was the go-to damage enemies spell.
I guess that makes sense,
unless they
would
were
use
water.
It occasionally.
Yeah.
There are a few types of enemies also, the turtle things and the guys who hang out in little holes.
Yeah, and I actually liked one thing that I liked a lot was, because it actually made me think of what spells I used, is in the desert, if you use Spark on those one enemies, they'd make their stuff grow out of the ground.
Yeah.
So you actually had to think about what you used. So I thought that the rest of the game could have used a little bit more of that in earlier areas. But
I think that in the overworld, I think that it works well. That's the time when you're thinking about using magic, because it's your puzzle solving thing. There's one item that in order to get to it, you had to lure these dudes before you get the water spell anyway. You lure these dudes with water on their back across this barren plain into a little position, and then you hit them, kill them, they explode, and then you can freeze the water they leave behind to walk across a bridge.
Right.
And that's sick. I love that as a thing. It makes you actually think, and it makes the water spell, which you get really late, feel like an actual reward, because then you know now oh, these are things I can now do easier and faster using the spell. So I don't know, I think I'm overall positive on it. Maybe I should have tried the magic more than I did, but I really didn't. I mostly just type words.
That you just use the default, it's push or pull, I think is the default one that you use.
I think maybe. Because when you type
I think it defaults
push
to the first one you get. Because, it pushes the enemies back.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a push when you hit them with the default spell.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a regular damage spell, but I don't actually know. If it was explained very early on,
Right,
and I
you just forgot.
Yeah.
I don't remember either. I just assumed that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But also might be wrong. What did you think of the fox in this one?
I like that the fox was given a character that like speaks to the player in a way, or like into the player character more so than the fox in Epistory did, who was more of like a metaphorical stand-in. But we talked about the narrative being that it was a concrete narrative, and giving the fox an identity of a character was a little bit odd. I don't know. Maybe I'm just uncomfortable with the idea of riding someone's son around like a horse. But that's where, I don't know. I didn't hate him, and mechanically I thought it was implemented. I have a whole thing that I want to talk about.
That's what I was asking, like how like in the first game you were just stuck on the fox, and we kind of talked about how that made our perception of like what our character looked like kind of weird, because like when you're moving the fox,
right,
so you kind of almost don't even see the girl.
Yeah, you're like, this is the game where you play as a fox.
Yeah, so that was kind of weird. So in this, you only ride the fox when you hit shift,
right,
to run around. So use your sprint button.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I like that better mechanically, but like there's something about like them always being together, as corny as that sounds.
Yeah.
In Epistory, that I kind of like better too. So I don't know. I felt like kind of weird about it. It's like weird, like thematic mechanic stuff.
Yeah, I don't hate the implementation of it.
No, me neither. But
my problem is more that I hate doing this. Basically, we like to talk about video games from a design perspective. That's like what our focus is.
Mm-hmm.
Is what we say, what's fun? Did this happen right? How was the writing here? Did this game come together as a whole? Talking about this game from a development perspective, from a does this game function properly perspective, this is one of the more unpolished games I think that we've played in a long time, and I think that the fox contributes to that a lot. There were multiple instances where I would like sprint with the fox into an area that I apparently wouldn't have been able to get into otherwise, and then just get stuck and had to kill myself to respawn. And you know, conveniently the game has a kill yourself button, which was ominous when I saw it the first time. I was like, why is there respawn on the main menu?
Yeah, I could never type it. I always had to click on it.
Yeah, they don't let you type it.
That's
I think
weird.
it's so you don't do it accidentally.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Though I don't know if you would.
It's kind of
type
a long
the whole
word to accidentally type, but whatever.
Yeah. So like that was a thing, and just like movement in general, I think is the game's biggest issue, like technically.
Yeah, it had some performance issues for me. I don't know about you, but like I had the settings down to where like the game should have run fine based on like the way it looked graphically, and it still had like some stutter. But yeah, and me, who historically doesn't encounter glitches in games, definitely glitched into a few places.
Yeah.
So that says a lot.
And I mean,
but like it's not so bad that like it really brings it down, or at least for me.
Yeah,
like it was rare enough that I didn't really mind.
No, I bring it up mostly as just like that's the reason I didn't get on the fox that much.
Oh yeah,
because I felt like it was always a problem.
Well, early on you're in like the forest, and it feels like there's not really like big open areas to really run through, so I barely used it for like the first third of the game.
Yeah, no, that's also true. And then just moving around on it, he gets caught on stuff really easily. There's a whole mechanic that I praised earlier about creating pathways using the bramble and the ice, and some cool puzzles later in the game where you combine the two. And I loved the puzzle, but then you have to walk across them, and the border between them doesn't always work correctly.
The collision on those was weird.
Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of like movement issues. And I don't blame the fox thematically. I just blame maybe it was a bit much.
Yeah.
I feel like they were going for like elemental like combination system where they wanted like all the elements to have their own effects on different parts of the environment.
Yeah.
And that probably really complicates how you move around.
Yeah. Specifically with those like bridges you make though, like it the way it looked was like it was like uneven terrain, and it feels like they tried to make the polygonal mesh uneven.
Yep.
I feel like that can't be what they did, because that feels like it would make no sense. But it's what it feels like in practice.
Yeah.
Like, it's always at the edge. I feel like it's something about the collision at like the edge of a cliff in the beginning of a new thing.
No, that's entirely... That's where most of the issue comes from, is when things actually meet. And I imagine it's because they tried to make the collision, like you say, like uneven. They made it match the actual image of what it looks like. So you have like
the texture.
Yeah, you have the thing. Well, not the texture. I'm now realizing what you meant before. I'm saying like I think that like because you are creating like individual instances of like ice, say, they made the pathway match that, but because it's an isometric game, you need more clearance to get through areas, so it ends up being like if there's slightly too little area here where the other thing meets it, you're gonna have to like go diagonal to fit through it, and it ends up feeling kind of awkward and strange.
Yep.
Cool puzzle idea that I love.
Yeah.
Bad traversal mechanic.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all. That's about what I had on the Fox, I guess.
I think that's about all I got.
Yeah, I would say I'm running fairly low on stuff. I do want to talk, because we said the narrative wasn't entirely up our alley, but I do want to talk about it at least briefly, because it has elements of it that I do like. I like the overall story. I think that having you enter the forest and then basically, because they kind of, Rosalind gets separated from her like mentor, who then just who shows up at the very end.
Yeah.
So like her backstory is not super important, and that's fine. But you get separated and you start going through and doing some shit just based on what your modus operandi is. So we'd look at plants, type words about plants.
Yeah, because you're an archivist.
Yeah. So you go through and you discover all this stuff, and then you get wrapped in, and I like the fact that like the final boss is also like the character referenced in the other areas. Like by the end it felt natural that like you start putting the pieces together at the same time that the character's putting the pieces together. And the fox puts the pieces together also for you a little bit. And so there's a through line through it. I think that it is narratively solid. And so I know that we talked about in the first episode how we were like, this game felt like it had a really personal narrative that we, the audience, just didn't get. Like we felt like there was more to it than we were able to.
The girl in the coma and everything.
Yeah. And it like we both were like, I don't know if it was both of us or like JJ was involved in this conversation, but being like I'm sorry, but I don't care about your.
No, that was, I think, definitely JJ that said that.
Yeah, it's like it feels rude to say.
Like you feel like obligated to like to like the thing because you feel like it's like a passion project,
right?
Yeah.
And so this gets to avoid that, I guess. But I don't want to say in like basically contradictory things. I think that the vague narrative in Epistory was good for what it was.
Yeah, but then the conclusion is what is it muddles it.
Yeah. And then in Nanotale, I feel like the story is narratively fine. It's very okay,
but much more safe.
And it's really safe.
Yeah.
And you go through and you fight a big snake, and like, ooh, the boss had got enraged the snake also. And like, who's got the true magic? These three people. And it's like, I don't know, it's cool. It's fine. I think that the presence of the word story and tale in the names of these games makes me feel like they should double down on the narrative in either way. Like, either a personal narrative that goes way further into the main character, or a story like this where they put a lot more effort into making the NPCs interesting and, like, fleshing out the world.
Yeah.
One of those things has to happen, or they need to change the name to, like, Nanotype. Because it's a game about typing. Predominantly. And a fun, cool one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all of that, I think, pretty much. I think, like, doing a game like this that's controlled with typing is probably difficult, as compared to just, like, implementing, like, a gamepad, which I'm sure there's a lot of, like, helpful pre-made tools and things in game engines for that. So I feel like that's probably what eats up a lot of their time developing, and then the story, they, like, do the best they can. But no, I agree. Like, it's like a wish list kind of thing. Yeah, like, I would like to see better stories in these. It's like a nicer marriage between the mechanics and the story or something, or, as you say, go all out on the fantasy part, or go all in, like a Celeste kind of personal narrative or something.
Yeah. Celeste is such a good example here, because Celeste managed to have a really powerful story that focused on an individual character without having a lot of story. Like, it was just beats.
Yeah, or like a short hike manages to hit really hard with relatively little. So, that sort of thing.
Do we have...
QWERTY thoughts?
Yeah, do we... I like QWERTY thoughts. It's not bad. Do we have QWERTY thoughts?
Yeah. I liked this game a lot. I don't want to make any, like, definitive statements, but, like, from what I was looking at, I feel like people are, like, kind of mixed on this game, but, like, for me, I kind of just liked it better than Epistory. Like, I felt like it was just, like, a very good sequel, but I'm in the camp that's likes that it went more for, like, a Zelda style game, because I like Zelda style games. And I could totally see, like, if you're somebody who wants to, like, just type a lot because it's satisfying, you're like, oh yeah, I really just want to, like, dig in and do a lot of typing, how you would enjoy Epistory more, for reasons that we discussed already, like how it's a little bit more arcadey when it comes to the typing aspect. But for me, I quite liked the puzzles. I liked what they did with the movement and combat, how you could just pop open the book and type at any time. I liked that they got into doing, like, elemental environment interaction, all the stuff that they did to, like, add, like, the additive, iterative stuff that they added on top of Epistory really worked for me.
Yeah.
But it is rough around the edges, as we said. Like, technically, it's got some rough patches, and there's, like, some missed opportunities and things in there. But, like, for what this is, I feel like I really kind of can't complain, personally. Like, I think this is very good, and it hit the spot for me. I feel like it's going to be, like, if you played the first one, your, like, expectations based on that are going to kind of dictate how much you like this or don't like it.
Yeah.
So thumbs up for me. Like, it landed on my side of the fence.
Yeah, and speaking from the other side of the fence, I suppose. I did still like this game. I think that it is good. I feel like the developer is really earnest about sort of, like, what it is that they're trying to do with these games. I never pick up this game and feel like it's way overshooting its like possibilities, and I don't feel like it is holding back either. Like, this isn't a cheaply made easy game to just put out and make money. It's a weird game in a weird genre.
Niche.
Yeah.
The nichest of niche.
The nichest genre. Maybe not the nichest, but in there. And it totally commits to it. And I think that it works pretty well. My main complaints are just that I felt like the game, one, it never got as challenging as Epistory did. And because it lacks the arena mode, there's no way to sort of like force that on yourself. Is one of the few genres of game that I feel comfortable being like, give me the hardest like possible version of this. And the vocabulary was kind of limited. I felt like I was typing a lot of the same words a lot of times.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, but I couldn't remember if I felt that about Epistory or not, so I didn't bring it up.
Right. If I remember correctly, Epistory actually had a like a dictionary update. Like they added words to it at some point. Yeah. Yep. And that's cool. Maybe that'll, because Nanotale is still pretty new, so there's still like an opportunity for patches and stuff. Anything that we say in a game this recent by a small indie developer, make sure that you check the patch notes before taking our word for it, because anything that we said could have been changed. But all of that being said, I still think this is a game that was made really well. I think that the ideas are still there. Epistory was a game that I liked a whole lot because of how unique it was. And Nanotale is a game that I like a whole lot for what it did, but I have a comparison point now. And I feel like they probably, given time, fall pretty equally in my book. I'm a bit of a bigger fan of Epistory right now, but Nanotale is still very cool, and I love the things that they did to change their formula. So, thank you for listening to NOCLIP Pocket this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, we're going to be talking about Tacoma, which is Fulbright's second game, I believe, after Gone Home. So, more of a mechanics light game to follow this one.
First person narrative romp.
So until that time, if you'd like to get a hold of us, all of our contact information is on our website at noclippodcast.com. There you can find our email address, our Twitter account, our Discord server where you can talk about our games that we played, and also suggest other games for us to awkwardly say things about.
Suggest games that we should play.
Yeah. We what you didn't just hear was us going, fuck, what are we going to be talking about next time? And have to pull up a list that's like old, and some games are on it more than once, and it was had to like pick and choose from it. You could help prevent that. And when we do talk about that game that you love, that you wanted us to talk about, you can listen to it over on iTunes, on Google Play, or on our YouTube channel, where you can also find playlists of all of the episodes in the main series in Pocket of horror games, and I might be adding a few more in the future.
And if you like the content, you can go down into the comment section. You can type out a response or a comment.
Yeah, we're petitioning YouTube right now to let you just type the word like in, and then if you do that, it would like all of our videos at once.
Yeah, if you type large and then like, it'll like all the videos.
Please type sharp like into the comments for us. Goodbye.
Type smash to smash that like button. Hey, this is bad.